Welcome back, I'm Bill. This is part 2 of my Unimet video. In the first, I did a restoration of a Unimet lantern, GL3 branded for the Camper brand. And in this video, I will work on the stove. Again, I'm going to try to do a minimal restoration on this because these are pretty darn rare. There are only maybe 3 or at most 4 known in the collector community. It is a spectacular runner. I normally, when I go camping, take a big Coleman 3-burner 444, but I've used this a couple times over the last year. For a small stove, it works extremely well. There's nothing wrong with it as far as how it runs, other than I believe this has a non-return valve in it, just from the style of the action from the pump. And it does seal when there's enough pressure in the tank, but as the pressure starts getting lower, the pip in the non-return valve, assuming that's what it is, does leak a bit. But the main thing is I'd like to get the paint on this in better shape. Someone has brushed on some silver paint, and some of it seems to be in random places. A lot of it is on the manifold and burners and around, they did the whole inside, but they splattered it all over the place. I'd like to get that off, evaluate what it looks like underneath, and then see if it needs some repainting, maybe just on the inside to cover up rust or bare metal, and I'd try to find something a little more appropriate in terms of the color. We'll have to see once we get there because I really don't know what's underneath. I do know because I tested, and this paint strips off extremely easily with acetone. So I will be doing that. And I'm going to see what I can do about replacing this latch. I don't have a replacement yet, but I've got one on order and hopefully it will work. Otherwise, it's just going to live with one latch. But I'm hopeful that I can get something that looks fairly original on there. So I will start by taking this apart, and I think we'll just fold these windscreens in first. Tilt that back, and we'll leave the tank on for now because it weights this down. And these hinges, and they hold the grate in place, and these hinges are held in place with some cotter pins. So I think we can just actually bend that and pull. Do a little more squeezing over here. Might have to do a little bit of tapping on that. Let's see. There's one. And the other goes the opposite way. Somebody's going to yell at me for using my needle nose pliers inappropriate there. And this should just come off. Let's see. There we go. Still got the price tag from the flea market. This was all of $10 Canadian. So there's our lid. And these windscreens. So these just have a little clip on the bottom that these screw into. rotate. These are kind of neat because they can be positioned in a variety of different ways. And there's our grate. It's in pretty good shape. I think all it really needs is a little scrubbing with some steel wool. We'll set that aside, take our stove tank off, and I think we'll just take the whole manifold out. So you can see there are square nuts on this. Someone has taken this apart at some point in the past, which means nothing's actually stuck, so far at any rate. Screws going in at a funny angle though don't want to come out. Let's see what happens when we take out this lower one. You might be able to tell one of the things that's irritating with this paint on the inside is they put it on there without actually cleaning it up. So the paint is over all of the debris that's in there. And actually it looks like it may have been sprayed on. It's hard to say because other places there are clear brush marks. So kind of a weird thing. These are there's our stove body. I'll set that aside. And let's look at, I've got a little washer here. Let's look at all of this. These also were held on with square nuts, which is kind of unusual. I'm just noticing this screw here looks a little larger than the others. These three all look the same. That one's bigger. And, yep, it's bigger. There we go. So you can see this thing screams AGM/thermos from the 1960s or late 50s. It's got AGM style burners, although the caps are stamped steel instead of cast iron. And it looks like these burner bowls, they're crimped in, so those aren't coming out. See how this burner works, and yeah, all of these are riveted in place. This one's interesting. As you screw it, it looks like the actuator is going through this nut here. This nut is riveted to this arm. So as we screw this direction, the arm tilts this way and it pulls this shaft down and closes off that burner. So it's the opposite of what you would expect on every other stove I've seen, where screwing it in closes it and screwing it out opens it. First time I fired up the stove, I got a little confused by that. And let's see, there's this little cover. This is where the generator goes in. Curious how this comes off. So the bottom piece is spot welded on, so that's not coming off. So that's not going to come off. They had to put this on first, then they put the burner bowl on and crimped this tube around it. So that's fixed in place. So you can see I tested here some acetone and the silver paint just wiped right off. And all of this is riveted in. So that's as far apart as our manifold and burner assembly is going to come, I think. Yeah, so let's work on this tank. Like I said, everything on here is great. It needs a new fuel cap gasket. I've been using this with a newer fuel cap. And I think it's got a non-return valve in it that when there's not enough pressure in the tank does leak just slightly. Once the pressure gets down to a certain level, all of a sudden it dissipates. And again, you can see things like this valve knob scream American gas machines. This generator screams American gas machines. In fact, I think this that design's a little late for this. They did that in the 50s, or early to mid 50s, I think. As I understand it, the point of this chunky generator is these were marketed as burning either leaded or unleaded gasoline, and I have no idea what's in there, but there's something in here that's designed to capture the lead. So probably don't want to mess with it too much. My experience with Unimet stoves is nil before this, but I have worked on the ash flash stoves, which were made in the same factory, presumably by the same people a few years later. And one of the things I've noticed, all but one of the ash flash stoves that I've picked up they were usually practically given away because someone tried to take the generator off and it snapped off at the valve. So I've learned with ash flash, you need to take a propane torch and heat up this joint before taking it apart. So just in case this has the same problem, having been made in the same factory, I've already done that. I did heat this with a propane torch, and hopefully this does come off. Yep, it will. I'm going to go ahead and, so we've got a hex here. I'm going to go ahead and turn it from here, and if this comes off, all the better. But I think the whole thing may be soldered. I'm not sure. Still pretty tight, but it's not going to snap off. That's good. Got a needle just like a Coleman generator. So I'm hesitant to do too much to this generator. It has to come off in order to get the valve out, because rotating it won't clear the pump tube. I'm hesitant to do a whole lot more with this. I definitely don't want to break this off. It's threaded, but it also looks like there's solder in there. And since I have no idea what's inside this, it feels quite heavy. So I may not do any more with this, or I may soak it in some citric acid with everything else, but doing so with one end up, one at a time, so that it doesn't have all of it doesn't get flooded with the citric acid. So I think I'll probably leave this as it is in terms of not taking it apart any further. And pressure in the tank. There is a little bit of gas in there, like a Coleman tank. There's no way to get all of the gas out through the filler. It's got to come out through the valve hole. At least I assume that that's how it will come out. Wants to still keep being tight. There we go. Okay. Keep that upright. And this should just unscrew. There we go. And that's not going to come apart any further because this knob appears to be, I don't know, it's pressed on there or something, but it's not going to come off. Let's take this valve out. Hopefully it's not crazy tight. All right, there's our empty tank. Let's take a look at this fuel valve. This looks essentially the same as a Coleman with the fuel and air tube here. So that just unscrews. And this we probably don't want to mess with. Tighten it up a little bit because it's pretty loose. But this turns our air wire up and down, which prevents flooding when this is being lit. This is exactly the same as Coleman's instant light circuit. So when you're lighting it, you turn this guy up and it pushes this air wire down to block this hole. And this means it's not completely blocked, but it's blocked enough that only a tiny bit of fuel creeps by. So instead of fuel rushing up into the valve and into the generator, you get air from the top of the tank that goes through this hole, down through this outer tube, picks up the little bit of fuel down at the bottom, and then the air carries it up an inner tube inside of this and out the top into the valve and generator. So you get enough fuel to light it, but not enough to flood it. And since gas vaporizes at a pretty low temperature, it doesn't take much of that flame to get the generator hot. And then once it's hot, everything starts working properly, and you can turn this lever back down, the air wire retracts, and you get, it opens the fuel pickup, and the system will draw as much fuel as it needs. Now, take these little screws out. And there's a pump. These are almost always stuck. So get a grip on the head with some pliers that are taped up. It is interesting how this and the lantern would have been made at approximately the same time, but this has a Coleman style pump with an air stem in it, and the lantern had an AGM style pump without the air stem. Backstop for the pump leather. This also has a flange on the inside to help center the pump cup, as opposed to the lantern, which had that little brass cylinder as a spacer. And take out the air stem, and let's see. Oh, I can see right down in here, and it looks just like the lantern check valve, so we may not be able to get this out, but I really hope we can. The Coleman check valve tool doesn't seem to thread into these, so I'm just going to use a large flathead screwdriver and get it centered in there. Oh, and that came out much easier than I expected. I kind of suspect that's because it's an NRV as opposed to a check valve, and that does look like a non-return valve. So let's see if we can unscrew this. So this guy comes off, and yep. We've got a spring and a little pip in here, and it doesn't look like cork, but it probably is, but it's either cork or some kind of rubber. And I can actually see, I don't know if you can, it's got the indentation of the bottom of the valve on there. So it's still pretty soft, but this would explain why it seals when there's pressure in the tank, but as the pressure begins to drop, all of a sudden it loses pressure quickly because there's not enough pressure to hold it up against the valve. So I'll have to pull this out with a pick, and we'll look at what the material is and see if we can make a new one. If it's cork, that's pretty easy. And now we've got, before we unscrew that, take the screw out. And there's our fuel cap, and we'll just replace that gasket. And so that's our full disassembly. So the next thing I will do is start working on the one hand, removing this paint, and on the other, we will take all of these parts and start working on getting them cleaned up with some citric acid and steel wool, and then some polishing. So our parts are now coming out of the citric acid bath, and I'm going to scrub them down with some 4/0 steel wool. Also rinsing the acid solution off in the process. just as with the lantern, I'm going to polish these parts up using a firm cotton buffing wheel and some white polishing compound. Okay, so let's start with this tank and find out why this paint is on here. If you look at this, this is definitely sort of brushed on. So I'm using just straight acetone. I've already experimented a little bit with this, and at least in brief contact it doesn't do anything to hurt the original paint. But you can see it does strip that silver paint right off. So yeah, I mean, why someone felt the need to cover that with paint, I don't know. There are things on the stove that are under the paint that I think I understand, but this is not one of them. The acetone's also pretty good at removing this, I'm assuming it's like a fuel residue or varnish that's under there. Okay. So I think that's it for the tank. So yeah, that was easy. I'm glad of that. And we'll set this aside. Set that grate out of the way. I thought maybe they painted this because the paint had burned off, but as I've used this stove, one of the things I've observed is that these don't seem to get burned. Cautious with the decal. I suspect this is the worst part of it. Again, you know what? I've seen worse camp stoves than that. Kind of gives me an idea of what's going on in here. I can see why somebody might paint that. That's it for the silver paint cleanup. Most of this stuff is fine. I'm gonna, like I said, I'm trying to do a minimal restoration on this. The one thing that's not so hot is the inside, and it's pretty much just the bottom. There's a few spots back here. I'm tempted just to leave it the way it is. Maybe use some evapo-rust on there to get some of the rust residue off. A lot of this is just grease that's in there, but you can tell it's rusty all over under the paint. And I actually intend to use this some, and I'd like to make sure it's preserved. So I've decided what I'm going to do is sand the bottom. I have some paint that's similar to this, and I think will blend relatively well. But what I'm going to do, instead of doing the entire inside, I'm going to sand out the bottom, try to feather in the sides a bit so it's a smooth transition. And I will paint everything from this lip down. And I think that's probably the least intrusive way to deal with this. So I'm going to start on the bottom here with an orbital sander and some 80 grit sandpaper and see how that goes with the paint removal. Ordinarily for paint removal I'd throw it in my electrolysis tank, but I don't want to take all the paint off. Just a quick little bit. That's working really nicely, and it'll give me a good finish for painting under there. So I'm going to continue with this, and I'll see you when I'm done. We're ready for some primer now. This is after sanding the paint and rust off with 80 grit sandpaper and then 150 and some 320 just to get it ready. It's still pretty rough. There was quite a bit of rust under that paint, and this is why I want to get the bottom painted. So I'm going to start with some primer, and we'll move on to some top coat from there. I'm doing these coats about 10 minutes apart, and I do 2 light coats and then 1 medium coat. Primer has dried for 24 hours. I'm going to top coat it with this VHT titanium silver blue engine enamel. It's overkill on this stove body, but it's just not going to get that hot in there, but it's what I've got, and it seems to be a pretty darn close match for the original. So the painting is done. For what it did, that was exactly what I was going for. It's not a perfect color match, but it's as close as I think we're going to get. If I made any mistake, it was not painting the entire inside. The front and sides are actually okay. It's just this back part, and it was just a few little spots. I did not factor in the possibility that removing the masking tape would take off more paint, but it is what it is. I'm trying to keep this as original as possible, and the main thing wasn't so much to make it look pretty, but to protect this from further rust. So I'm going to polish the outside of it, not going to look at the inside, but the outside, just to try to clean up the paint some more and get it looking a little bit better. And I'm going to use some Mother's Mag and aluminum polish. This is a metal polish, but it's my favorite paint polish as well because it's not too aggressive. It works really well, and it leaves a nice shine and does a better job than automotive paint polish does. So I'm just going to take an old terry cloth rag and get a generous amount on there and just start rubbing, and where it's where there's spots and things like that, it should take a lot of that off. Also shine it up. You can already see how black that's getting, or dirty. An idea, just that little bit, you can see how much shinier that is. It's a bit cleaner. All of the discolored spots that are in places like this are now gone. So it shows us the dirt and shows us what are the real scratches. I'm just going to keep at this. Let's start putting the stove back together. We'll start with the manifold. The silver paint came off quite nicely, except on the, the burner bowls, and I realized what this is high temperature silver paint, and when they say you have to cure this stuff, you really do. Someone didn't cure this, so it wiped off extremely easily everywhere that didn't get really hot, except these burner bowls, which did have the paint baked on. So just a lesson, if you actually do want this stuff to stick, you need to follow the instructions properly. So we'll put our burners back together. That one screw that's a little bit larger than the others. Someone obviously lost the original. These two little screws here, so this part of the manifold doesn't come off. Okay, let's put this manifold in. Same thing for this guy. Sorry, you probably can't see anything. Now, the other awkward part is getting the lid on. So we need to put this guy down first, and I guess it goes on top. And then these go through. Okay, we've got that on. Now, I just need to put these cotter pins in. All right. Sorry, I had to go off camera to get these cotter pins in. They're a lot more complicated than they actually look. Get this rotated the right direction, and we'll spread those apart. I literally had to get my face down into this thing, so that's why off camera. All right, now let's get these windscreens on. So the scorched one goes on this side, and it sits like this. Actually, it's designed so it can, I can see now with this curve, it can go around the corner, which is kind of neat. So what we want to do, actually, it goes around the corner that way. On there, put this funny nut thing. I'm not sure what the name for that is. One side, so it can go back like that, or even come forward. And this is designed so that it snaps up on here if you want it to stay there. Fold that down for now, and this may quickly end up out of your view. Should you ever find yourself working on a Unimet stove, which you probably won't, but should you, these might be easier to put on before installing the grate. Okay, there we go. adjustment. But you get the idea there. All right, now let's work on the tank. So push this back. Let's work on our tank. Got our cap parts. Got a new cap gasket here. Let's work on our valve before we do the pump. Actually, I think that's everything. So we've got our air wire is attached. We'll just put the fuel and air tube back on. Make sure it's snug. And we'll put this on after we've got the valve installed. Okay. I'm going to put some thread locker on here. Nothing quite as severe as what they had on there originally. I'm just using Permatex Blue. Make sure it's sealed, while also ensuring that if need be, we can get it out fairly easily at some point in the future. Almost. That looks 90 degrees straight. Let's make sure this guy's snug. We'll check that for leaks. And now we'll put our cleaning needle on. Easier to put that in this way. Feels good. And now let's put our generator on. So I did clean this up a little bit with a wire wheel. It does look like there's a spring in here, as you would expect on other stove generators. It won't come out as it is. I did heat and quench the gas tip a couple of times, and it really doesn't want to budge, and I really don't want to snap this off because these are unobtainium. So since it was working fine before, I just cleaned out the outside of it. I can see, I'm glad someone else didn't break it off, because it's got tool marks or plier marks all around here, and there were some here as well as the ones I left on it. So someone's tried to take it apart, and I'm glad they didn't break it. There's no reason why another AGM style generator wouldn't fit on here, but and I do know people have replaced these generators that are designed for burning lead and they have replaced them. Okay, they have replaced them with a non-leaded AGM generator as well. I think this might be the same diameter as a Coleman, so if you could trim a Coleman generator down to this length and rethread it, you could probably get that to work too. Now, let's deal with that check valve and that pump, or the non-return valve rather. Now, I was going to replace the cork that was in here, the pip, and this, I gave it a chance to rehydrate, and it seems to have soaked that up, and I think it's going to be okay. I'm also going to stretch the spring, which should also help with the sealing problem. So we'll put that on, spring on the pip, and put the pip down in there. Some pliers and make sure this is tight. Now, instead of putting this in as tightly as I possibly can, I'm going to put some thread sealant on here as well. Just in case I decide I need to replace that pip, so I can get this out more easily. So we'll just drop it in, and we're in. And that should take care of the NRV of our pump. Cap, spring, backstop, pump cup, and retaining washer. Make sure that's tight so it doesn't fall off down inside. And I'm going to oil this using 3-in-1 oil. Like I said in the lantern video, any non-vegetable oil is fine. Vegetable oil kind of goes rancid and then hardens. So it's not a good choice. As far as I know, that's any vegetable-based oil will do that, whether it's canola or olive. Just stick with machine oil, motor oil, neat's foot oil. sure that works. I can feel there's more resistance on the NRV, so that's good. So we are all gassed up. Let's get this tank mounted and put some pressure in it. Plenty of pressure. Just like on a Coleman, we'll turn the lighting lever up. That should restrict our fuel flow so it doesn't flood. Get a match ready. We'll hold it to the burner. And it should take anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds for that to settle down. It actually looks pretty good right off the bat, but it will take a bit longer for this larger generator to heat up. So I have not replaced the latch while doing the video. I'm still waiting on the one I've ordered. I've looked at maybe cannibalizing a Coleman stove for a latch, and they're just not the right size. So it may go latchless on one side, but we'll see. I've ordered one that matches the dimensions, and all I need to do is change the shape of the hook. The little blue flames are starting to take their form. Oh, there we go. All right, that's our primary. Let's go around the other side here and fire up our secondary burner. Let's turn out the lights and see how that flame pattern looks. Let's go in for a closer look. Like I said, I've used this stove a bit since last summer. It does run really well. For a smaller stove, it's great. So thanks for watching. I hope this was informative and enjoyable, and I will see you next time.